See where everybody. So we are now live. Welcome back to the Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is Tuesday, the 21st of January, and we are going to begin the week with one of our top priorities, which is housing. And to discuss many aspects of housing, one of our greatest housing partners, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. We welcome Scott and Polly and their team, and we take it away. We will introduce ourselves because we have some new members that you may or may not be familiar with. So, Thomas.
Tom Chittenden, representing Cheney Southeast. I think we've Zoomed before, so it's nice to see you all in person.
Yes, just zoomed over South Burlington not long ago. You attended our board meeting.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for having me.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Randy Brock, Franklin.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, Roland County. That's
Right, and it is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. For the record, I'm Gus Steelig. I'm the director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Several people are with me today. Colleen Majors, our policy director, will share most of the testimony. And also here, assuming time allows, is Liz Gleason, who directs our Farm and Forest Viability Program. And though not planning to speak today, Danny Hislop is our housing director, but if you have a question we can't answer, she's actually in the trenches making the deals happen. So I want to begin with just, we're here to discuss, to report to you on what we've been doing. I want to start by saying thank you to this committee and the legislature as a whole have given us a huge amount of support. So we're going to discuss what we've been doing with the resources you've given us across 2020s, across the pandemic, which have been out of scale from anything we've seen before. We'll talk about the impact. We'll talk about leverage. We're going to talk about rural community development. Time allows to talk about the value of conservation for rural community development. But I also want to say we're here to be accountable to you, to hear your concerns. I never ceases, no matter how, to inform me how much I may think I know some part of the state, but as representatives, you often have insight that I don't have about what's going on in your communities. And so that's much appreciated. Some of the concerns have been expressed to me before getting here that we'll try to address are issues of how is the board dealing with equity? How are we dealing with cost, which is an issue that keeps me up at night and that I am very concerned about. But what we want to start with is really something the governor said to us, which is make transformational investments. And that can mean a lot of different things. I recently finished the historian Doris Kearns Goodwin's newest memoir about the 1960s, which she worked on with her husband, Dick Goodwin, who had been the speechwriter for JFK, for LBJ. He wrote the speech in which he said, "We shall overcome," and then helped Robert Kennedy write a speech he delivered in South Africa in the midst of apartheid. It's known as the Ripples of Hope speech. And I think what I want to say to you is that the work we do, I think, helps to ripple across the state in every community over many years. And it goes back many years ago when we were working with a fellow named Hugh Gates in Franklin, Vermont, who owned a phone company and won a lottery and wanted to do something for the seniors in Franklin. And had trouble getting attention from anybody but us. And ultimately, we hooked him up with Sarah Carpenter and Beacon Square. He called Sarah his guardian angel, and he's built both independent and assisted housing in Franklin with our help. And it's still going strong. I think they had their 25th or 30th anniversary a year or so ago. And there's examples like that all over the state. And I just also want to acknowledge Molly Dugan, who is here from Cathedral Square today in City Hampton. Going to start this presentation by talking about the story of transformation, not from anybody's district, which was what the people know me to do, but from St. Johnsbury, because I think it epitomizes the ways in which historic preservation, which is a conservation activity under our statute, and community development come together. This building is right at the key intersection of the community. If you talk to Senator Kitchell, she would have told you that St. Johnsbury went through a really hard time about 12 or 15 years ago. And at one election, the voters had it in their select board, and everybody got voted out in one election. A year or so later, they invited Paul Costello on the Council on Rural Development to come to their community for a community visit. And through that process, the community said, we're not going to improve our downtown and improve our community if we don't turn around the building that you see pictured here. It had been bought at the end of the 80s by an out-of-state investor. He got to give him a big Section 8 contract, which gave him plenty of cash flow. He didn't care at all about the building. Long-term bed bug infestation, excuse me. And he left most of the commercial space you see in this picture vacant for most of those 30 years, about 10,000 square feet at the key intersection. So it was just killing the community. And we worked with Senator Kitchell on a special appropriation for the kingdom. We didn't know if we could make a deal here. There were other possible priorities across the kingdom at the same time as the EB5 problems up in Newport. But eventually a deal was made, and this building has been renovated. Condominium structures, the local economic development corporations now built all the commercial space. The apartments are much nicer than they were, and the Section 8 certificates have been maintained to keep it affordable for people in the community. It's really I think of it as a triumph of democracy. The voters, the community said, we're all coming together to solve this problem. And although St. Johnsbury has challenges, this has been a big success. And I think things like that have happened all over the state. I'm not going to go through our entire statute, but for those of you who are newer to the committee, we came about in the mid-80s when the federal budget for housing and the federal budget for conservation had been greatly slashed. And we're instructed not just to build housing or preserve housing or to conserve land, but to do it to promote economic vitality and quality of life. So Senator Weeks, in Rutland, these are 3 different examples of how our mission comes together. I don't know if you attended the groundbreaking in West Rutland a few weeks ago, but there's 26 apartments going up there. Not far from there is the West Rutland Marsh, which is a not just state treasure, but national, perhaps international treasure for birders to come to attract tourism. And we made when the Paramount was working to get back on its feet, we had a grant them as a community gathering place. We've done that with a range of both venues like the Latches in Brattleboro, but also with community stores, country stores that are being taken over by the community. So we try to we have on our schedule this month to help the Canaan Library. We also helped win a major federal grant through another program. To get to the biggest issue of where have the dollars gone, we've invested $377 million to serve, when it's all built out, close to 5,000 households. I think we'll cross that number of 5,000 at our March board meeting, maybe even at our board meeting this week, as a matter of fact. And we've done that in a number of ways. Again, seeking transformational investments. The primary thing has been in rental housing, because that's been the biggest shortage. But we have invested also in home ownership, both new homes and turnover of homes. I think you heard about through the Champlain Housing Trust. We continue to in one-on-one in small communities and large to make accessibility improvements. Before Julia LaClaire left Governor Scott's administration, she said the most important thing you can do in Vermont right now as the chief recovery officer is help establish recovery residences all over the state. And we've done that as well. We've worked in mobile home communities, often on infrastructure, sometimes in acquisition, and we began doing infill during the pandemic as well.
Can I pause us here?
Okay.
Please. And I'll come back.
So I don't want to be inaccurate. I feel like this is a very good story to tell if we're like trying to just take raw numbers and not look project by project, but say, you know, this was the total investment from 2020 to now. Is that right?
Yes,
From the state.
yes. And I think those numbers include the ARPA amount.
Okay, and that leveraged the other money additionally.
Correct.
So there's two kind of very rough numbers that you could get from that. One is a pretty astoundingly low cost per unit to the state to build that housing, like 74,000.
We are doing different things. So some programs bring the cost way down.
Right.
The most expensive stuff, and we'll talk about it, is building multifamily rental housing and building new units of any size. And we'll get into that as we proceed there.
Right.
So yes, our farm worker housing program, trying to address issues of equity. When we're doing repair projects, we're doing that at $30,000.
Right.
When we are helping a farmer replace housing,
Yeah.
it's more expensive to build anything new than to do repair projects.
And at the beginning of this vast amount of money that we got, it was not quite as expensive as it is now. I mean, it has grown in the last year and a half, in 2 years, particularly with inflation of materials.
I think across the pandemic, I also want to say, we're in a different place today because we know that dollars are going to get tighter.
Yeah.
And one of the instructions to us was to go as fast as we possibly could. To get units up, to get people out of motels. One of the things we did, and we did some things that didn't leverage any money, like help communities establish shelters, because there was a facility to purchase and there was not the fundraising capacity. With the first tranche of funding from the Community Coronavirus Relief Fund, we actually, at that time, got it in May, and it all needed to be expended by the end of the year. They eventually extended that deadline, but we ended up returning $33. And our first goal was to not return dollars. It wasn't leverage funds doing it.
Right.
So different things cost. There's a range of different costs for each of these activities.
Yeah, no, I think I'm trying to help you share
Yes.
good news. I'm not sure.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
that, that I hope we continue to have this conversation. I mean, you all do such great projects, flagship projects, that when you see waste, or when you see a cost that you think isn't helping people get units of housing, that it truly is worth, sounding the horn and saying, like, we should work to reduce that cost. But otherwise, you are taking, public dollars and stewarding them beyond units of housing, but really even if you multiply that figure by 3 for the actual maybe cost, you get somewhere in the $200,000 to $250,000 range. So the scale at which you operate is having benefits, even if project by project, it looks like a higher cost per unit.
Yeah, and again, because I know that cost is a concern, and it should be. I said, keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
The cost of what we build today is just beyond the scale that any of us would have imagined.
Right.
One thing I'd say to you as somebody who's been doing this for 3 decades is every time we hit a threshold, I can remember the first time we crossed $200,000 a unit when Barb Grimes was the commissioner of housing. I thought, my God, how could we be there? And we actually was a project on the green in Fairhaven, a beautiful marble building where the foundation was collapsing. The building was a work of art. And we made them go back to the seller and negotiate a lower price. And we came in a little slightly under 200. But today, does that look like a great deal? It absolutely does. If we were looking at that opening picture in St. Johnsbury, one of the things about cost is sometimes we're bringing dollars in that would not be available to build housing in Greenfield. So that project generated over $2 million in equity from something called the historic tax credit.
Right.
You couldn't use on a new building.
But you could.
So we try to think about that way of does the additional cost to do a historic building is somebody helping to bring it down. Anyway, we'll get into that more as well.
Well, given our time, we want to move it.
This slide is just to say housing production continues to be underway and happening all over the state. Across 2 weeks at the end of June and beginning of July, we attended 8 ribbon cuttings or groundbreakings. That was more than 200 apartments and the opening of 2 shelters, the first shelters ever in Lamoille County, and a first new shelter in many years. There was none in Caledonia County. So these are exciting times. And I just want to say, just as we look at our closing schedule for the next, from now to the end of June, there'll be 13 more projects closing that will deliver 335 apartments. 100 units in Hartford over the course of the summer, but for those of you who do not represent Winter County, next year we'll be telling you about 86 units opening across Rutland County. And Franklin County will finish 33 units this summer and begin 30 units in Highgate. And in Chittenden County, well over 100 units from Heinsberg through Burlington will be under construction this year. Pipeline. This is what our pipeline is for the balance of fiscal 25, not calendar 25. We were scheduled or written into the budget bill to get $30 million into ARPA funding if it was made available. And as late as early December, Doug Farnham thought we would see at least 10 million of it. But he did something to protect the state's interest, which was to spot the money so it became not ARPA money with deadlines, but general fund replacement dollars. The wise thing to do to keep anybody who hadn't spent the money from from losing it, turning it back to the feds. But what it meant was all those people who weren't going to spend their money by the ARPA deadline said, please don't take it away from us. So we, instead of having another $30 million, we've got about $13.5 million left in our appropriation, and in some federal grants we administer will be $50 million chasing it. When we look out to fiscal 26, we told the administration, and we're measuring a pipeline near $80 million, maybe in excess of $80 million of requests to us, not total project cost, but requests to us. So I think we're at the point where we met with many of our partners about 10 days ago to say that the ARPA money was not coming. That is going to slow down people's willingness to spend money on pre-development costs, whether it's permitting, project design, optioning properties. If they don't think they can get their deals done, they're not going to risk
Right.
the dollars to keep moving ahead.
So,
Is that point?
yeah,
So what I think I would have just heard you say is what's really important is addressing some of the appeals and the uncertainty that happens in the current place. So the developers need that more certainty, and that's one of the biggest impediments to some of the housing projects you're pursuing. Is that what I heard you say?
That's among the things you've heard me say. Yes, yes. Appeals create uncertainty, but I'm also saying to you on this particular point, if the capital resource, if you're a developer and you don't think that the resources are going to be there to fund your project, you're going to stop spending money.
right. And the budget adjustment, we're still unclear on whether some of that money will come from the budget adjustment.
Yeah.
We're living in hope.
And I'm sure that all the other projects that didn't meet the ARPA deadlines in the way we did are good ideas, good projects, or they wouldn't get in the budget to begin with. So, I'm not trying to knock that. I'm just saying it's not coming our way at this
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
So you've heard some big numbers from Gus, both on the historic investment the state put into housing and also what the system can use moving forward to create more housing. So I want to take a moment to talk about the return on housing investment that we see here in Vermont. And when we think about return on investment, it's both that very classic return on investment that's financial, how many dollars is a dollar of housing investment leverage, but it also, we see this housing investment create a return and the benefits to the community and from shifting costs off of other state programs. So I just I'll talk through the different types of return, but we see that financial return. We also see a return on investment in helping downtown development in creating new rural neighborhoods like this one in South Hero. That's in the picture here, where new senior housing that Cathedral Square has developed is part of a new neighborhood that has a library, a store, municipal center, and is really helping be a center for that broader community. Housing dollars are helping to clean up polluted downtown sites and help it add them into the tax base of the communities. It's helping to create new neighborhoods and protecting vulnerable Vermonters. And all of these returns aren't time limited. There's a permanence to them. And I want to take a moment to talk about permanent affordability, which is a tenet that flows through all of VHCD's programs and why we see it as a wise public policy. So permanent affordability, we see it protect Vermonters, we see it protect mixed income communities and protect state assets. So the picture over on the left-hand side of Copley Terrace in Morristown, this was a subsidized senior housing project that was developed with a federal program that had a limited term of affordability. After a term of, I believe it was 30 years, the owner could turn those units into market rate apartments. And this was the hospital in Morristown. And at the end of that contract, they said, we need space for our workforce, which is true. And we would like to convert these to homes for traveling nurses. Unfortunately, that left the 38 elderly tenants in an extremely vulnerable situation of where are they going to find housing when they lose this affordable housing, which is really untenable for them. And Evernorth, a statewide housing developer and partner of ours, came in and purchased the building with support from VHCB in order to keep those units permanently affordable and to keep those tenants housed. When housing is built or purchased with this permanent requirement, we're never putting those tenants at risk of displacement when the units flip to market rate that the tenants cannot afford. We think about the pressures in Vermont's real estate and what that does to our communities. We want Vermont to be a place where people of all incomes can live, not just those who are moving here who have a higher income. The neighborhood you're seeing here is an architect's rendering, Cambrian Rise in Burlington. It's a public-private partnership. It's developed by a developer, Jonathan Farrell. But many of the buildings are built by our nonprofit partners, including Cathedral Square and Champlain Housing Trust. And it is the most economically diverse neighborhood right now in the state because you have these high value homes with beautiful views of the lake, some of which are market rate. And I was looking at 500 square foot studio is going for over $2,000 a month. And then you also have family and elderly affordable housing that the rent is much more affordable at around $1,000 a month. So you are preserving the mixed income nature of that neighborhood, and that story is echoed across neighborhood across the state. Permanent affordability also protects the state's assets. So we're taking state dollars and helping to create this housing, and that is going to be there in perpetuity. We've seen this with Northgate Apartments in 1989, the year I was born.
Thanks, Polly. Thanks.
Yeah, how about that?
I agree with you.
Again, similar story to Copley Terrace. Housing built with a subsidy. The term of affordability was expiring, and the residents there were going to face displacement. The affordable housing community, including VHCB, rallied around this project, helped to preserve it as perpetually affordable housing, these 336 homes. And that was in total $22 million project at the time. If we had a 35-year affordability term and had to rebuild those homes today so that people still had an affordable place to live, that project would be a conservative estimate closer to $170 million. So it's a wise fiscal investment to make the investment now, have it be perpetually affordable, always an asset for Vermonters.
And I want us to pause at this photograph because some very important.
Is that Sally?
Sally, right in the center. See Sally Fox, so
Oh,
vibrant and
Yeah.
engaged. It's just making my heart happy. Thank you for shooting that photo.
It's a very joyful one. We always like to include it. So to talk about kind of the straight return on investment in dollars invested, you heard in our discussion with Senator Hinsdale that we have different leverage for different programs that we administer, but our programs, like any other housing program in the state of Vermont, is built on the idea that we put in state dollars that are leveraging other dollars. What you're seeing here is one of the biggest sources of leverage is a federal program, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, created by President Reagan in the 80s, that allows private equity to come into the state to build affordable housing here, but it can't cover the whole cost of that housing. The program requires that there is a subsidy that comes in and covers a portion of the development. So the VHCB investment in affordable housing is then leveraging this private equity and helping to create homes around the state. And we're going to talk more about cost, but if we look at the last 10 multifamily projects that we've done, we see an average cost that keeps Gus up at night. It is high of a total development cost of $550,000 per unit. But when we look at what the state investment is in that, we're not cutting a $550,000 check. We're putting in more like $152,000 per unit. And that is leveraging other federal resources, and it's leveraging other private resources as well.
And just to put a pin on this, we're going to come back and do some housing financing 101.
Yeah.
And it's always good to have a refresher because it's very complicated and it just helps us appreciate what goes in and how our dollars are used to bring all sorts of partners to the table to make this housing possible.
And when you do that, you're going to hear that there are two different types of credits, the 9% credit and the 4%. 9% are limited, but more valuable for the state. 4%, historically, we were not able to access those credits in Vermont because we didn't have enough state subsidy to draw those down. With the investment we've seen, with continued state investment in affordable housing, we can continue to unlock this additional resource. Affordable housing helps create new neighborhoods. We know that we need 25,000 to 36,000 new homes in the state, and new neighborhoods is a way we're going to get there. So this is just some example of projects where the housing investment is for create the neighborhood, and often it's the first investment into the neighborhood having that catalytic change. We're working in downtowns in partnership with the TIF district in St. Albans. The TIF district helped create about 250 homes, 170 of which have leveraged VHCB programs. And investment in affordable housing protects vulnerable Vermonters. So this fellow that you're seeing here in the picture, Steve, experienced homelessness and went through the motel program. When Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, a development partner of ours, built homes in Bellows Falls, rehabbing an old garage building there, Steve was able to get into permanent housing. And he talked a little bit about what that meant for him. I'll share his quote. He said, "I've come a long way, believe me. Everything is good as long as I maintain my health. It's pretty incredible given that 6 years ago, they gave me only a 25% chance. That's what housing can do. If I weren't here as I am right now, I know my health would just go downhill." So by getting this man into permanent housing, he is no longer accessing the hotel program, bringing down that GA cost in the budget, not an emergency room, bringing down healthcare costs as well. And when the value of a permanent portfolio of housing in the state is that most of the Vermonters exiting homelessness who are housed in permanent affordable housing over the course of the pandemic weren't in new units, they were in already existing units that were protected and available to them. I'll quickly go through the nuts and bolts of our programs. VHCB administers a suite of different housing programs, and that is because we know communities around the state have different housing needs. So a multifamily building isn't the right fit for every community, and we invest in everything from home ownership, manufactured housing communities, right through to permanent supportive housing that brings in services with the housing to help people who are struggling in housing to be successful and maintain their tenancy. And also shelters for Vermonters facing homeless, to protect Vermonters facing homeless.
Polly, before you leave this slide, did
Yeah.
this home begin as a mobile home and then was built out?
No, this is a zero energy modular home.
Oh,
I
great.
believe this one is not a Vermont, which has gotten pretty pricey. I think it came out of the company from Maine, if I'm recalling correctly. There's a new product now finally available, and Warren Buffett, these companies have provided zero energy ready mobile homes, which brings the price point
Wait,
further down.
yeah,
We actually brought 7 of them to a park in Bennington, and there are 19 due to arrive in Brattleboro in the summer at
great,
Tri Park, where we're.
At Tri Park,
after
right.
The flood.
terrific. Very exciting.
So existing tenants who will get a new mobile home in a relocated lot
Right,
space.
out of the flood, yes.
Yes,
That's what's gonna happen.
Some of us want to expand the number of lots. Works as well, so
Yes.
it's just right.
And one way we're helping doing that is when we work with manufactured home communities, we help with acquisition of communities for cooperatives and nonprofits, again, to keep those homes, which are also often home ownership units, affordable to the Vermonters that live there. We also help parks invest in infrastructure, which we know is one of the
Which we
major
have been-
costs.
very supportive. Okay,
I want to talk about who we serve. Vermont PHCD statute asks us to serve Vermonters for rental housing up to 100% AMI, and for home ownership, we can go up to 120% AMI. And one of the reasons why these state dollars are being targeted towards Vermonters at the lower end of the income spectrum is because that's where we see the hardest choices being faced. That's where we see the highest rent burden, the highest. And when someone is paying 50% of their income to rent, that leaves so much less left over for food, for medicine, for transportation, for childcare. And that's one of the reasons why we're targeting that population. We're addressing a market gap. So even if the market could build the 25,000 homes we need, it still couldn't provide those homes at an affordable rate to Vermonters. And that's because the cost for construction is so high. So if you see the average median cost for single family new constructed home is over 600,000. With a 20% down payment, still need a family income of $160,000 to afford that.
It's gonna be your first question to.
yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I didn't.
And sorry if this is not where you all focus your energies on, but as we look at new units and where you foster your energies, how are you trying to match it to what people are seeing the needs in regards 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, 1-bedroom studios? What market measures are you using to try to align some of our housing stock coming online, especially in the affordable space, to best suit some of the most pressing demands?
We and the HFA require, when we're underwriting multifamily deals, market studies. What we've seen is that household size has shrunk in Vermont. So we're building, if we were talking 25 years ago, we were building many more 3-bedroom apartments. Today, the majority of units are 1 and 2 bedrooms, as family size has shrunk.
Follow on to that.
And let me just, one other, we're doing something in your neck of the woods in Shelburne because there is a refugee community where we are actually building more 3 bedrooms than we normally would, maybe a few 4 bedrooms to accommodate that community, which has larger families. So we do look at market studies to help us figure out in any particular location what should be the.
In this discussion, we have constituents in our district that are really advocating for more supported independent living type configurations for those with varying types of needs. Is that also part of what you're looking at in lining some of your?
Yeah, we've funded 2 projects. If you're talking about folks with, the parents groups supporting their kids with intellectual or developmental disabilities. We've funded 2 of the results of the pilot feasibility studies. We have 2 more on our agenda. of this coming week, actually.
But increasingly, my understanding is that most of your projects have some aspect of supportive housing. Many of them do anyway.
Yeah, not the home ownership work,
Right.
not necessarily the mobile home park work, but yes,
But,
we're doing
but most
rental
of the
housing.
multifamily.
And we do all, we have always, Con Hogan were alive today, we told you we could never fully branded without VHCD. We helped buy a whole bunch of property back then. The models have changed. And there's a whole range of need within that community. There are some people, some of you who know Max Burrows, his mom Kathy worked for us for 25 years. He would not want the level of supportive housing that we are going to build in Moncton. But when I met a parent and a young person who's going to live there, along with Frank Chiaffi, who's the guardian of parent, those people need intense support. Max probably needs a caregiver available, and we're about to break ground on a development in Waterbury where 3 apartments will be managed by Upper Valley Services specifically for that community with a support person available.
Yeah, thanks.
I think to be fair to you all, and as we drill down to try and still work with you to bring the cost of housing down, it might be helpful in the near term to see the different line items that go into that $615,000 amount. And I know it's average and it's rough, but I wanted to see overall of the money we give you, how much is spent on permitting and red tape and things like that. But even a scenario.
We'd be happy to drill down with you, but I
Yeah.
just want to make clear on this slide, the 615 is not what we're building. That's what the market. the
Right,
FAA
right,
is
right.
reporting that's the average
Yeah.
new construction home. And if it were a decade or 2 decades ago, you might think, oh, well, that's going to get me 3,500 square feet on Spear Street with 5 bedrooms and 3 baths.
Yeah,
Today, that may be getting you a 1,500 square
Right.
foot home.
right. So it's not your burden to carry alone to explain that breakdown. But I say that too, because it's probably about to get worse with trade. I can't call them negotiations, but conflicts, that are, we're
Call
gonna,
it what it is. Call us, in this case, call us spade for
So we can't say
but
that.
we're not saying that. Or,
Yeah, no, I mean, for,
don't think of an elephant.
Just means- call it the truth. The truth is we may have some serious challenges on that front. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to drill down with costs with some of the developers who are coming in
Sure.
and with our financing 101, because that's a piece of what we'll be looking at.
Mhm. What I think will ultimately be helpful, and we've started to have this conversation, is when you talk about the private market or our nonprofit partners, what additional value are you getting for a higher cost from our nonprofit partners? Like, we're going to have to be pretty fluent in that, that, okay, maybe the private market could do this, but if we care about X, Y, and Z value add, how much does that increase the cost? I just think we need to be conversant in that ourselves to be able to explain.
Agreed. And as we know, many private developers aren't willing to go in doing anything unless they have a nonprofit partner to work with them. So why don't you keep going?
And we're gonna touch and cost
Yeah.
on cost. I'm gonna try
Right.
to get us there as quickly as possible. You're the Economic Development Committee, so I just wanted to touch on the workforce that is housed within VHCD's
Right.
portfolio. The professions you see here, many other essential professions in the state have average salaries that the workers qualify for the housing that we're building or our partners are building. VHCD programs are also working to center equity, and we're doing this through targeting lower and moderate income households. We're also doing this through creating programs to meet the needs of special populations. The farm worker housing program that we helped to create in partnership with Champlain Housing Trust was just called out in the state's fair housing report as a model for addressing a fair housing gap for a very vulnerable population. we're working in recovery housing. Gus spoke to the housing that we're working on to help folks with developmental disabilities. And I want to say that as we survey these are nonprofit partners, look at the demographics of who's living in the housing, we're seeing that they're serving BIPOC households at a higher rate than the population. So if BIPOC households are 6% of Vermont population, they're 9% of the households living within the portfolio in rental housing, 10% in home ownership, and really sadly 22% in shelter, which says that we need to create more homes for people exiting homelessness if we're going to address equity in the state. We're not builders. We work with both nonprofit and for-profit developers across the state. Here's a statewide map that needs updating of our nonprofit partners. And we also work with private sector developers, both in creating what's called turnkey development. So the private sector developer, as we see with this building in Stowe, builds the building. And then if the building is acquired at the end by a nonprofit partner who's going to steward it in perpetuity. Or we have private sector developers like Summit who will create affordable housing and they will steward it in perpetuity.
And by stewarding, you mean
Managing, right? Yes. And I guess I'm going to turn it back to you. I'm wondering if you want to say anything about farmstead laws.
Well, one of the things that happened there at the end and that we've seen through the pandemic is that there was a shortfall when they got to closing. And I'm very happy that we set aside some funds to deal with that for all of our partners because the bidding environment has just been crazy. And so we were able to keep that project on track along with a number of others by having our board create a fund and authorize board chair or special, in this case, we actually had a special committee meet to authorize the release of funds on about a 2-week turnaround so the project could stay on track.
It's like we're having advancing slide issues. There we go.
So this is another turnkey development. DEW got the site and built the building and turned it over to Twin Pines at the end of construction. The points we wanted to make here is we put $6.2 million into a 42-unit development, and that unlocked $8.5 million in private federal investment. The rents here are $1,100 to $1,300 a month. A 1-bedroom in the area can be $2,400 a month. So we're going to have people with Section 8s living here with very little money, but most people making $30,000 to $60,000, which is qualifies, will be able to live here without rental assistance. If this were a market development, and I'm not sure it could be constructed without a whole lot of financing, including equity investors who would probably want to be repaid within 7 years, usual for the terms in real estate, at least as I understand that part of the field. And then rents would have to go up even more, or you'd have to have a different financing atmosphere in order to lower your debt service. So it might not have been built as a market rate unit, which I think is why DEW said, oh, we've got a great site. It's in walking distance of all of White River's services. And we'll find a nonprofit partner.
Thomas.
They're about to do the same thing in Barry to help them with recovery.
Right.
In those housing 101s, which I welcome, I would love to understand more about how do these manage if incomes increase over time? So but that's for another time, and I'm assuming that'll be part of it.
That'll be part of financing 101.
Thank you.
That's what we thought we needed it. Let's say a refresher.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I understand you heard from Chris Donnelly last week, but this is a shared equity home in Norwich that we invested about $13,000 in 1993 when it would have cost about $75,000. It turned over last year and was able to be sold in Norwich, Vermont for the mid 150s. It had a market value of at least $250 in a community where nothing sells property for under $600 today.
Yes, average in Woodstock now is $713. Awesome.
At City's Edge, which is a development that CHT has funded, there were 4 resales in the last year. We invested $25,000 back when that got built. And all those homes went for about 150, where they had a market value of 300. So we have, for those of you who view yourselves as fiscal conservatives, we think that the sharing of equity is a fiscally conservative approach to home ownership.
They're here.
Okay, cost drivers. The slide here is about Putney, and so the cost driver here is going to be construction delays due to appeals and permitting. But at the
But
White,
this is a render.
what?
This is a rendering.
It's not done yet.
Okay, I was like, wait.
It's not done yet. This is a render.
Yeah, this will be,
We'll all be at the.
Yes.
Yes.
yes, we're all coming to this.
And it's been to the Supreme Court twice, so the legal bills alone for the developer were $75,000. We will get back the bid soon, but it was gonna be, when we funded it 3 years ago, it was gonna be 400,000 a unit. It's gonna be much more expensive now. We're waiting for the bids to come back. At the Whitenburg conference this year, they said that labor in Vermont was more expensive than our counterparts in Maine and New Hampshire. And that our construction workforce is growing much more slowly than those states. As you saw earlier, we have, with your help, started a program with construction trades, CTE centers. And there are homes being worked on all over the state today, so that's a small contribution we can make to the workforce issues. Materials and delays in projects have added to the cost. Elevators are a particular big problem. The opening picture in St. John's Ferry, and then that leads to other problems. The building was ready to open in June of the year it opened, and the elevator hadn't arrived and didn't arrive in October. And then there was a further delay, and I have a friend who's now retired from Otis Elevator from a former college. Anyway, this is true all over the country. There's a shortage of people doing the installations. So why is that important? Because when you are building a project, you take out a construction. And 3 years ago, your construction interest might have been 3%, and last year it was 9%. So I can't do the numbers in my head, but if you're carrying $15 million of debt at 9% or whatever, every month that adds up and adds cost. So that's a problem.
We hit it as a problem here, right here in Montpelier after the flood. And people trying to reopen hotels and just the huge delays on elevators. So what held them up.
Historic requirements and cost, they are, I think, sometimes offset by the historic tax credit, which we can't get. Site cleanup, it is a really good thing for, I think, all of us on a site like the one we showed you earlier in Windsor. It's cleaned up, but I think that's, and we often get funding to do those site cleanups that wouldn't be available with Green Street project that makes the sticker price higher. So those are, and then we are concerned down the road about what the impact of tariffs will be. A lot of the wood we buy is actually milled in Canada, even if it's cut here. So I don't know how that's going to work. There is also something called the Build America, Buy America provisions that were passed in the Biden administration, which we haven't hit that yet with the federal funds we administer, but the CDBG program started to hit it a year and a half ago. And what that meant was there were times where they gave a project a grant, $500,000 grant, and when they looked at the BABA requirements, it was going to raise the price by $1 million. So they, Alex, and before that, Josh came to us and said, would you just fund it because you've got a lot of one-time money and we don't want to kick BABA in? And we said yes, in order, again, to move more quickly.
Can I pause you here, Gus? When we're talking about cost, when you're looking at this list, I just want to name that this cost driver list is going to look very similar, whether you're talking to an affordable housing developer or a private developer of housing or commercial space. So as this committee is thinking about costs and thinking about what can bring down costs, we have a broad constituency that's happy to engage in that conversation.
Can I think, add to that point, and Gus and I talked about this as well, but you might look at a historic project as a private developer and say, there's no way we'd even touch that, right? And so you all come in and you create the beautiful, aesthetically delightful, revitalized historic building. I think we need to start looking at like discounting that a little bit, not having the perfect be the enemy of the good, and looking at requirements that are not federal for historic preservation, because we can't afford to choose historic over cost effective
So,
every time.
okay, I agree with you, and I can show you a half dozen examples where I think our state historic preservation officer went overboard. But there are some projects that do require review by the National Park Service. And all I'm trying to say to you is,
Yeah.
if we can get that private equity that we can't get for a housing project, and that will offset the increased cost, that's a good thing.
Right.
Right. And particularly in our downtowns, where those historic anchors are, if those buildings are anchors to the aesthetic, they're important to keep. I mean,
I just think we need to touch that rail, because, with ADA, that's as important as historic. I hope you'd agree with me. And,
Yes.
you can still say, okay, this is going to be too much of a burden and not pencil out. And so we will not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We have to be able, I don't know why historic would have special treatment over, other ways of accessing and enjoying a building.
Well, I'm gonna take this up.
Someone's going to yell at me after this,
Well,
who's watching.
I'm gonna get yelled at.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm gonna say. I'd be happy to give the committee a tour. We did this with the House Appropriator in Montpelier, the block above Aubuchon's, which was vacant for 75 years, hadn't been
Right.
occupied since the 1940s. Was renovated a couple of years ago and reopened in very nice apartments. The historic preservation folks looked at it, and there were internal staircases that could never be permitted under today's fire code. They made us keep and glass in those staircases, which cost us 3 apartments.
Yeah.
I think that's really stupid.
right.
They disagree with me.
Mhm.
I lost that battle. That's a great example of,
No.
I really appreciate your honesty. If we both get yelled at, I appreciate it.
easier to yell at me and bureaucrat. They can't yell at you. I mean.
They yell about us
The-
to
the
somebody
division-
else.
the Division. So what have we tried to do to deal with cost? We did 10 hotels that got converted to housing or shelters. We did that in part because we could acquire them, and especially when they were already suites with kitchens in them. We could get them online much more quickly. Sometimes there were permitting issues around that. I don't know that you need to do anything about that, but that may be subject to look at. In general, at the time we did each of them, it was at least 100,000 a unit cheaper than if we had built something new. So we've done infill and mobile home and manufactured home communities, again, to speed it up and to make it cost effective. We are doing something called naturally occurring affordable housing. There's a project called Dorset Commons. It's what's known in the industry as a Class B property, right? About 100 units, right for an out-of-state investor. The rents were probably a little higher than we usually see, around $1,400 a month. But if an investor from out of state had bought it, the rents would have been in South Burlington, I think closer to $2,000 a month. And Kevin Dorn was the city manager in South Burlington at the time and said that's a big save. So that was something we did with not nearly as much money as we usually spend. Preservation is often a strategy that we will use to keep people in a community and have a lower cost. We're also always looking at whether we can maximize some other federal source that is highly competitive, and we've been able to do that on a number of occasions. The funders themselves collaborate regularly. There is often design work that gets done, design engineering, and we are always looking at what the requirements are.
And you're also looking at all sorts of creative new modular building on site and bringing it in. I mean, you're doing more and more of that. So
Yes, that's,
we have some
The-
exciting new things happening.
the industry is mixed on that, in terms of whether it actually saves money, but it will make more availability more quickly.
Yeah.
Developers also work to contain costs, and every project was competitively bid, that we're involved in. The costs you're seeing are coming from the private sector. We don't have as robust a building industry as we once did. There are less people in this business. And from what we see, the costs between nonprofits and for-profits are pretty well aligned. There are some differences, but not substantial ones that I have seen recently. It's just the costs have been going up for everybody. They're all subject to the same atmosphere that they're working. One thing as we compare ourselves to other states is that we tend to build smaller projects, which I think often
Something
speak
I want to talk
to,
about.
it speaks to what's appropriate in rural communities often. And it also speaks to how many dollars will be available. So policies, and you've heard me speak to this in the past, but density and regulatory reform are part of it. I like the idea that, and I spoke to this at the orientation, that when you're in a designated area, certainly a 1A area, and you've had all this public process to say, here's where our village wants to grow, here's our new town center, and you still need to get your local permits. I would say to you, that shouldn't be appealable. And an idea we presented last year, a different one, is that New Hampshire has a housing board of appeals that appears to be working faster than the courts. Whenever you go to court, it slows things way down. It's very unpredictable. Chair Clarkson knows of the situation in her community, in West Woodstock, that took 9 years in the courts to
We're
resolve.
shaving off a year? I thought.
9.5.
Yeah, to the 10-year thing.
Yeah, I think it was just under 10.
Yeah.
A decade. And they had the opponents who were abutters, had a neighbor who worked for free, who was a very good attorney, and he got it to the Supreme Court 2.5 times.
Yes, I think we're gonna make progress on that proposal on the appeals. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, something that I have talked with my colleagues in ACCD about, I haven't talked with Secretary Moore about it, but the process of getting a corrective action plan, I'm told by developers, takes at least 12 months. In the case of the Sacred Heart Complex in Newport, 18 months. And I think there are three issues. One is, can the governor and Secretary Moore figure out just how to cut the time in hand? The second issue to look at, and I'm not saying the standard is wrong, but our standard is much higher for dirty dirt
Yeah.
than EPA requires.
Right.
Maybe EPA is too conservative on that. We certainly. The third issue is, when can you just cap a site, leave the dirt in place rather than trucking it to a landfill somewhere? All those things add cost and add time. So.
Yeah.
I don't think you need legislation, but I think we need the administration to focus on that.
Yeah.
Energy strategies and equity and energy policy, I think is an issue. The way we dealt with net metering last year, people of my income can still get rooftop solar and do net metering. Where you have a deadline, I think the end of this year, where net metering ends for multifamily housing.
We need community net metering or multifamily
So we
housing.
need something to replace that. We haven't figured it out.
Agreed.
But I would also say to you that as our costs have gone up, EBT's standards under their order from the Public Utilities Commission is to be cost effective. And the kind of projects we do and the incomes, the limited income that you have from affordable housing development will never meet what somebody who you can leverage debt for would be. So we need, I think, more equity and energy policy to help bring energy dollars to affordable housing projects.
Agreed.
More than is available. My friend and former college classmate David White recently suggested a sales tax exemption for building materials that we for affordable housing projects. I have
Yeah,
no
that's a
idea
big
what the
tax.
revenue loss would be.
It's a big tax expenditures. Maybe that comes with a great way to replace it. We'll entertain it. He
Yeah.
just needs to figure out how to replace.
Infrastructure assistance. You know, there was a time in this country where when big developments were being built, municipalities welcomed them and provided the roads, drive, all the infrastructure into a project. We had a fellow named Tom Weaver serve on our board for a number of years, and he does a lot of development in the Colchester area, or did. He's retired now. And he said, I'm always looking for sites where I've got great road access, I've got public utilities right there. We need to figure out how to take that off the backs of developers, I think. It would be a good thing to do. So those are some thoughts on cost containment. Just gonna finish up with a few other thoughts for you. You've seen a slide like this before, but we need to build in the right places. The picture on the left is public housing development that Fed's actually built in the 1960s in Brattleboro. When Irene hit, it was their fourth flood in 10 years.
We did a field trip for the committee.
We did. We had a great field trip at Melrose Park,
Yeah, so
Paris.
we replaced it with 73 units, and this year we opened this parcel in Brattleboro that Sir Sasebo Lumber used to own. We
Right.
actually took the berm out, took a lot of fill out. That's a conservation project.
We went there too.
Okay, so you've seen it.
We have.
It's surrounded by a neighborhood, and
It's perfect and it's right downtown. So these are two places that are like sponges that will hopefully take the water before it hits downtown. Brett. And it did actually in the floods of 23. Melrose
yeah.
Terrace was very helpful.
This is what we've done since you invented us back in the late 1980s. We just helped Island Pond acquire the island that you see out there. Want to just make a couple points about our conservation mission as we finish up today. This picture was a story of a New York Times, subject of New York Times story called "The Town That Saved a Mountain and the Mountain That Saved the Town." And after the lodge burned at Mount Escutney and the ski area closed, there was actually a decline in property values in that community. And the town came to us and said, we want to buy the land around the lodge as a town forest. We want to take a page from Human Trails, which has seen great economic activity from all the bikers who've come there. And they've created trails there. They've reintroduced family skating in the form of a rope tow, and I think now
We now have a chairlift.
you have chairlift. So it's been a great community project, but contributed to the community. A different kind of project was the purchase of Prospect Mountain by a nonprofit when two people who'd owned it for 30 years were just tired. Agriculture. The fellows on the right, I met Reg Chapman in the mid-90s when we both had hair on our heads. And he had a vision, and his
You still have the hair.
not much. Not much. Reg wanted to buy a neighboring farm and get to it having a 900 cow dairy. I think he may now own more farmland at 3,200 acres than anybody else. He's milking 16 or 1,700. He has 800 more. He employs 28 people. At the other end of the state, the Course Dairy is a wonderful organic operation. And as out-of-staters came in during the pandemic, they depended on a lot of leased land. We helped conserve the home farm back about 2012 or 13. But we've been helping them secure their rented land base with 3 or 4 more conservation projects since then. Without that, the survival of their dairy would be very difficult.
Yeah.
Historic preservation, we do lots of community gathering places. Our board visited the Brandon Library, which is just a wonderful facility. As I said, we're about to help town of Canaan with their town library. Many years ago, we helped with the Allen Homestead, and folks in Norwich put in a small grant. They raised a ton of money to reestablish the Grange building as a community.
No, it's meant a lot to Norwich.
And with that, if you have a few minutes left, if you're willing, want to give Liz the floor to talk about the Farm and Forest Liability Program. And if you need to get to lunch, we will.
We have a caucus at 12:20. What's your time? Could we give you, how many more minutes do you need now? Or could we have you finish that?
I'm happy to come back or do an
It
abbreviated.
would be
5
so
minutes.
sad to, because I
Whatever
do
works.
have to go get lunch, but I feel bad.
So if we get, could we do 5 minutes?
I.
I think it would be great
Let-
to do 15 minutes a different time, but I'm just gonna
Okay,
give
then
you
let's invite you back.
this teaser, which is the Rural Economic Development Initiative.
Right.
We've spent $1 million since Senator Starr put this into statute in 2017. And we've generated $22 million in grants so far in community, rural communities all over the state. So it's a great part of Liz's work and her story. And we'll.
It's a great story.
To you.
We will have you back.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
your
for
questions.
teeing us up. This is
Never want to
Yeah,
stand
But
between
many
you and.
questions.
We wouldn't hear the information as properly.
Happy also
It's
to
best.
sit in the cafeteria with you over a cup of coffee as well. So,
Right, and so we'll be back for all these things, all aspects. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your partnership and